Imagine a world where stealing a single loaf of bread or a silk handkerchief could get you a one-way ticket to the edge of the planet. For the British Empire in the late 1700s, Australia wasn't a beautiful vacation spot with kangaroos and white beaches. It was a dumping ground for the people they wanted to forget. Today, on 5-Point Historian, we are uncovering the 5 brutal truths of Australia's dark beginning. In this video, we will first explore the horror of the hell ships, where thousands of prisoners were chained in darkness for 8 months. We'll look at the great legal lie called Terra Nullius, which allowed the British to steal a continent by pretending nobody lived there. We will uncover the story of the starving thieves and the city criminals who were forced to become farmers in a land that wanted to kill them. We'll relive the tragedy of the Black War, a secret conflict that almost wiped out an entire people. And finally, we will discuss the stolen generations, a dark policy that lasted until the 1970s and still haunts Australia today. If you want to discover the secrets of how a massive jail became a modern nation, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to 5-Point Historian right now. Your support helps us keep history real and honest. Now let's go back to 1788. 1. The Hell Ships, a journey to the unknown. The story of British Australia begins with a crisis in London. After the American Revolution, which we talked about in our last video, Britain could no longer send its prisoners to America. London's jails were overflowing. They were so full that the government started keeping prisoners on hulks, old rotting wooden ships sitting in the Thames River. These ships were disgusting, filled with disease and smells that could kill a man. The solution? Send them as far away as possible. The First Fleet, 1787 to 1788. In May 1787, the First Fleet set sail. It was a group of 11 ships carrying about 1,500 people, including 736 convicts. This wasn't a normal voyage. It was an 8-month trip across 24,000 kilometers of dangerous ocean. The convicts were kept below deck in the hold. Imagine being chained to another person in a room with no windows, very little air, and hundreds of other people who haven't showered in months. The first brutal truth is that these were truly hell ships. The food was often rotten salt beef and hard biscuits filled with bugs. Disease, especially scurvy and dysentery, was everywhere. If a prisoner died, their body was sometimes left chained to the person next to them for days before the guards noticed. When they finally arrived at Sydney Cove in January 1788, many of the prisoners were so weak they had to be carried off the ships. They had arrived at the edge of the world, and for most of them, there was no way back home. They were prisoners of the ocean before they ever became prisoners of the land. 2. Terra Nullius, the great legal lie. When Captain Arthur Phillip stepped onto the shore of Australia, he didn't see an empty land. He saw the Eora people, the local indigenous people who had lived there for over 60,000 years. In fact, Australia has the oldest continuous living culture on Earth. But the British had a problem. According to international law at the time, if a land was occupied, you had to buy it or win it in a war. The British didn't want to do either. The empty land strategy. The second brutal truth is that the British invented a legal lie called Terra Nullius. In Latin, this means nobody's land. The British argued that because the Aboriginal people didn't build stone houses, didn't have fences, and didn't have farms that looked like English farms, they didn't officially own the land. They viewed the indigenous people as part of the nature, like the trees or the kangaroos, rather than as humans with legal rights. This lie allowed the British to take whatever they wanted without paying a single cent or signing a single treaty. For the next 200 years, this lie was the foundation of Australian law. It meant that every time a settler built a house or a fence, they were technically stealing land from people who had been there for 2,000 generations. The British didn't just bring guns, they brought a legal system that made the original owners of the continent invisible in their own home. It was a theft of history as much as a theft of land. 3. The starving thieves. City people in the wilderness. We often think of convicts as dangerous killers or pirates, but the third brutal truth is that most of the people sent to Australia were just poor, hungry city people. Many were teenage boys who had stolen a pair of boots, or women who had stolen a piece of bacon to feed their children. These people were from the crowded, dirty streets of London and Manchester. They knew how to survive in an alleyway, but they had never seen a plow or a seed in their lives. The war against nature. When they arrived, the British expected the convicts to start farming immediately. But Australia is a very difficult place to grow English crops. The soil near Sydney is sandy and poor. The sun is incredibly hot, and the seasons are the opposite of Europe. The farmers didn't know how to plant, the seeds they brought from England didn't grow, and the local animals were impossible to catch. By 1790, the colony was literally starving to death. The governor had to put everyone, including himself, on half rations. One convict wrote that he was so hungry he ate his own leather shoes. They spent their days cutting down giant, hard eucalyptus trees that broke their English axes. They were city thieves who had been dropped into a wild alien landscape and told to build a civilization. It was only through incredible suffering and the eventually successful farming of the Hawkesbury River area that the colony survived. Australia wasn't built by pioneers looking for adventure. It was built by exhausted, hungry prisoners who were forced to work under the threat of the whip. If you are shocked by these stories of survival and the hell ships, please like this video and subscribe to 5 Point Historian. We are almost at the most intense part of the story, and your support helps us keep telling these brutal truths. Now let's look at the secret war that the history books tried to hide for a century. 4. The Black War, the secret frontier. As the colony grew, the British needed more land for sheep and cattle. This meant moving away from the coast and into the interior. As they moved, they crossed into the territories of different indigenous nations. The fourth brutal truth is that the settlement of Australia was not peaceful. It was a long, bloody, and secret war known as the Frontier Wars. The tragedy of Tasmania, the most famous and terrible example, happened on the island of Tasmania, then called Van Diemen's Land. In the 1820s, the conflict between white settlers and the Palawa people became so violent it was called the Black War. The British settlers used black lines, thousands of men walking across the island in a giant line to catch and remove every single indigenous person. Indigenous groups fought back with incredible bravery, using hit-and-run tactics and spears against muskets. But they couldn't win against the numbers and the diseases the British brought. In Tasmania, the local population was almost completely wiped out within a few decades. Across the continent, thousands of people died in small battles, massacres, and poisonings of waterholes. For a long time, Australian schools didn't teach this. They called it settlement or exploration. But for the people living there, it was an invasion that led to the destruction of their world. The modern beauty of Australia's farms and cities was built on the battlefields of this hidden war. 5. The Stolen Generations, the darkest legacy. Even after the wars ended, the British and Australian governments continued a policy that is perhaps the most painful part of this story. The fifth brutal truth is the story of the stolen generations. Beginning in the late 1800s and continuing until the 1970s, the government believed that the only way to help indigenous people was to make them act white. The policy of erasure. The government passed laws that allowed them to go into indigenous camps and villages and forcibly take children away from their parents. These children were usually mixed race, half British, half Aboriginal. They were taken to state-run homes or church missions where they were forbidden from speaking their native languages or practicing their culture. They were often told their parents had died, even if they were still alive. The logic of the government was terrifying. They wanted to breed out the color. They believed that if these children grew up in white society and married white people, the indigenous culture would simply disappear within a few generations. Imagine being a mother and having a government official take your child away because of the color of their skin. This wasn't something that happened in the Middle Ages. This happened in the 20th century. Thousands of families were broken, and the trauma of those stolen children is still a major part of Australian life today. In 2008, the Australian government finally said sorry, but the scars of this policy are deep and will take many more generations to heal. Australia today is a wealthy, multicultural, and beautiful country, but we must remember that it didn't start with a dream of freedom like America or a dream of trade like India. It started as a giant, remote prison. The prison island was built on the backs of convicts who survived the hell ships and the starving time. It was built on the great lie of Terra Nullius and the blood of the Black War, and it was shaped by the tragedy of the stolen generations. In our next and final video of the series, we are going to see how all of these pieces, America, India, Australia, came together to create the global superpower of the Victorian era, and how the sun finally began to set on the British Empire. Please like, subscribe, and remember, stay curious, stay historical. I'll see you in the next one.